Your Partner in Success Radio is a free business podcast with host Denise Griffitts. It's all about great stories, conversation, and context to help you move your business and life forward with actionable tips and advice from her guest experts. To listen and subscribe, just find us on iTunes, Google Play, or wherever you consume your podcasts.
Good morning and welcome. My guest today on Your Partner in Success Radio is Robert Kerbeck, and he is the acclaimed author of Ruse, Lying, the American Dream from Hollywood to Wall Street. And honestly, I have it in front of me. It is a riveting memoir that chronicles his transformation from an aspiring actor to one of the world's most skilled corporate spies. And his unique approach to rusing, R-U-S-I-N-G, or social engineering has earned him praise from notable figures such as Frank Abagnale. He was the author of Catch Me If You Can, and if I'm not mistaken, there was a movie. I don't watch movies or TV, so I'm guessing, who lauded his mastery of the craft. And in this conversation, you can expect to learn insights into the shadowy world of corporate espionage, how Robert Kerbeck transitioned, from acting to becoming a top corporate spy. I can't talk today. I'm sorry. It's very cold. I'm in the deep south. It's about 20 some odd degrees outside. We're not used to that, so I'm shivering a little bit. The ethical dilemmas faced in the world of corporate intelligence gathering, techniques of rusing or social engineering used to extract valuable information, and how his experiences in corporate espionage influence his writing careers. And he has another book that I'll get him to mention just before I bring him back in here. So the process of turning his extraordinary life experiences into compelling literature is fascinating. So anyway, Robert, good morning. I've got so many more things I can say, but I would rather you said them. Good morning, and thank you for sending me your book. It is fascinating, and it is in front of me as we speak. But before we get started, can you share a bit about yourself with our audience and how you like to show up in the world?
Well, thank you, Denise. Thanks for having me, and thanks for braving the frozen tundra of the Deep South for me. Yeah, I mean, I think today the way I show up in the world as the author of Malibu Burning, the real story behind LA's most devastating wildfire. That was the book I wrote before Ruse, and that came out in 2019, right after we had this massive wildfire, which my wife and child and I fought to save our house. And I wrote an essay about it for the LA Times. A publisher read the essay, asked me if I'd write a book about that fire, and I wrote this book about, at the time, the worst wildfire in recorded Los Angeles County history. And here we are 6 years later, and now we have had fires that are far worse. And in my book, I kept talking about that. I kept saying we all have to do better. Homeowners have to be more prepared. Agencies, government, everything. And so it's a little disheartening and demoralizing that I'm sitting here today. I've been down in the fire zone for the last 5 days. I wrote an essay for the Wall Street Journal about these fires. So forgive me for segueing right away from Ruse because I love the book, and of course everybody's interested in corporate spying. But at this moment in time, these fires again have really come to the forefront, and I'm hoping that finally the state of California, the United States of America, and the leaders around the world realizing that wildfires are not going away, they're getting worse, and we all have to do things to prevent so many homes from being burned down and so many people from being killed, so many animals from being killed.
You brought that up because one of my recent guests was talking about the things that you can do to get back on your feet immediately. Not immediately, it's going to be a long, long time to restore that part of California, but he gave us some really great information on what you need to do, what you do need to do. So this is a big topic right now. I mean, we're talking about corporate spying, which, today's the inauguration. That's top of mind, I think. And then, the wildfires. I mean, there's so many things going on right now that just have you either clutching your head or bowing your head in prayer or both. There's a lot going on in our world right now. So, and thank you for sharing that book. I'll make sure that my show notes have that. And thank you for sending me the link to the Wall Street Journal. I will get that into the show notes as well. So let's get started on how you went from, excuse me, acting to becoming a corporate spy. That doesn't seem quite right to me. How did that happen?
Yeah, I know. Well, your audience, if they have an artist in the family, usually there's always, one black sheep of the family, the artist, and it's tough to make money as an artist. When I moved to New York, my hometown is Philadelphia. I moved to New York to be an actor, and of course, actors need survival jobs. I didn't really have the patience to be a waiter. I wasn't a late night guy, so bartending was out. And a friend of mine, as a matter of fact, the only person I really knew in New York, one day mentioned this job. And all of a sudden he said something and then he shut up right away. Like he had been told, don't tell anybody about this job. Don't tell anybody about what you do. And I said, whoa, dude, whoa, what's this job? I'm broke. Help me out. And so he very reluctantly got me an interview for this job. And I went up to this this woman, was the, boss. I didn't know what the job was. I didn't know what her company was, but I show up, and I was living in Hell's Kitchen, basically in a cave with two other roommates. And I show up to the Upper East Side, and your audience may or may not know, but the Upper East Side's kind of old Manhattan money. It's old money. It's a very wealthy area. And I show up to this doorman building, take the elevator up to the penthouse. This woman opens the door and ushers me into the nicest apartment I'd ever seen. An apartment really, it doesn't even do it justice. It was, a beautiful, beautiful New York, Manhattan home. And everything was white. And I remember being very concerned because I'd walked from the subway and, when my shoes filthy, was I going to ruin this woman's, pristine white carpet? And she sits me down in the middle of the room and she asked me all these questions about myself and my relationship with my father, and never says a thing about the job, never asks me for the resume, which, back in the day I had with me, sends me on my way, has not told me anything about the job. And I'm pretty sure I've blown it. Whatever the job was, I didn't even get close enough to find out anything about it. So I get a call, I forget if it was that day or the next day, from my friend, and he says, you're hired. But don't get too excited because no one is able to do this job. And the next day I went out to Brooklyn to this young woman who was the trainer for this business, which I still did not know what it was. I show up to her apartment and she is quite attractive. And she says, come on, you'll work in my bedroom. And I still had no idea what this job was. And she takes me into her bedroom and there's a desk and a futon. And I really was not sure what I was going to be asked to do. And then finally she says, sit down at this desk. And she begins to explain that what we do is we use our acting skills, our ability to create characters, voices, do accents, to trick people inside major corporations into revealing secrets, private corporate information that we then sell to our clients or to this woman's clients. And that was when I began my introduction, my apprenticeship as a corporate spy.
I know I read a lot of this in the book, but I'm still stunned by it. And I'm not actually surprised that this happens, but I've never actually spoken with somebody who has done it. So you're probably going to have to come back again and finish this story at some point. But at what point, I mean, you could have done all kinds of, acting work, voiceover work. I'm sure you can do voiceover work. I have to ask you, did that scare the heck out of you once she explained what you were going to be doing? Did you just go, okay, ick, I can't do that? Or were you fascinated? What was your thought process during that?
That's a great question. I think my thought process was rather simple, which was I was broke and I needed a job.
I wrote that down. Sorry, broke. I got
Yeah,
that part.
unfortunately, necessity is the mother of invention. I needed money, and I was getting paid a whopping $8 an hour. But at the time, $8 an hour was what I needed to be able to pay my bills and stay in New York and continue to try to be an actor. And just a brief segue on the acting, I was doing quite well as an actor. I was doing all of these shows, theater off Broadway, but really high quality off Broadway shows. I was starring opposite Callista Flockhart, who is Harrison Ford's wife and quite a successful actress in her own right. And working with James Gandolfini, who went on to star in The Sopranos. James and I were doing plays in church basements and all kinds of places that young actors start out working to hone their craft. And you need a survival job. You need a job that has flexible hours, and this job did have flexible hours. That was one of the big highlights. You could go and you could do your spying thing for 3 or 4 hours and then leave and go to an audition and then come back. So initially it was just I needed the money, and so I just listened to her as she began to explain what we did. And in terms of the moral and ethical issues, at first it seemed rather harmless, in this era. Obviously this was pre-LinkedIn, so we're talking right now early 90s. And one of the big things that we initially started going after was the talent at rival organizations. So, nowadays you can go on to LinkedIn and you can see who works at this firm and you can see who works at that firm. But back in the day, people didn't really know that. And so if the woman that I worked for, in the book, her name is Leona, Leona would get hired by this corporation and they'd say, look, we want to basically steal top talent from our rivals, from these 3 or 4 rivals. Can you get their organizational charts and can you identify who their leaders are, who their top people are? Because we want to try to steal them because that firm is really doing well and we're not doing as well. But if we steal some top people, it's going to help our bottom line, right? Which is absolutely true and is still a big deal in corporate America. I'm a big sports guy and I always use the analogy to make it easier, maybe for people that don't understand how valuable stealing top talent is. In football, the New England Patriots were a dynasty. They won the Super Bowl over and over and over. They had a quarterback named Tom Brady. Tom Brady leaves the New England Patriots. He goes to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. What happens? Tampa Bay Buccaneers win the Super Bowl. What happens to the New England Patriots? They have not won a Super Bowl since. Right? And it's the same thing in corporate America. If you can steal the Tom Bradys out there from your rivals, all of a sudden now you have Tom Brady on your team. Now you are winning Super Bowls. You're ranked number 1 in your area. Your stock price goes up. Everybody gets big bonuses. And so identifying the rock stars at rival organizations so that they could be poached or stolen away was a huge initial part of what we were doing back then.
I mean, that does make sense to me. And you mentioned in your book, you mentioned encounters with several Hollywood stars. You just mentioned a couple of them. Could you share one of your most memorable celebrity stories from that time?
Well, the most memorable story, and the one that everyone asks me about, is working with O.J. Simpson right before the infamous double murders. Again, I was, an actor and I needed a job, and my manager calls me up one day and he says, hey, I got this job, in this, exercise video. It pays $7.50 a day and you get free sneakers. And at the time, and I just remember so well that my sneakers had holes in them. And so the idea, the $7.50 was great, but the idea of brand new sneakers was really exciting. I said, my manager's name was Bobby. I said, Bobby, I can't dance. I'm the worst dancer in the history of mankind. I cannot do any exercise video. He says, no. It's an exercise video for guys. You're going to be doing push-ups and sit-ups and, guy stuff. And I was like, I don't know. He says, come on. It's with O.J. Simpson. I said, what? Yeah, he says, it's O.J. Simpson's exercise video. And I'm like, oh my God, O.J. Simpson, I am in. I grew up, I'm old enough that I remember just a little bit watching OJ kind of at the end of his career on TV, play football. And then I remember, he actually was pretty good in a couple of movies. And so, I was a fan of OJ Simpson. And so I said, oh yeah, okay, I'm in. And I show up on the first day of shooting, and there's OJ. Me and my buddy were hired, and these 2 beautiful women. And they were in, leotards and basically dance gear. And the studio was on a dance floor, and all of a sudden I'm introduced to someone who is the choreographer, and all of a sudden I begin to sweat because now I realize we are going to be doing dancing. And sure enough, the choreographer, snaps his fingers and has us line up and does a routine, and then says, "Okay, you guys do it." And of course, the two women do it perfectly, instantaneously. My buddy Mike does it really well, and even OJ does it pretty good, and I am just completely lost. The choreographer comes over. He's looking at me like he's going to fire me. There's no doubt. I know he's going to fire me. As a matter of fact, I almost want to quit and just walk away right before he fires me, because I shouldn't be there. I'm not a dancer. I get it. Sorry, I apologize for wasting your time. And before I do so, OJ says, "Oh, no, 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 no. You can't get rid of Rob. You can't get rid of Rob. His dancing is so bad, it's making me look good. Rob stays." And in that moment, I learned a very important lesson in Hollywood, which is rule number one is make your star look good. And my dancing was so bad, it was making OJ's dancing look good. And so therefore, he wanted me around.
I'm picturing it in my head. I haven't seen it, but I can picture it in my head. And I agree with OJ, believe it or not. My thinking is, if you're watching one of these things and you see Robert dancing poorly, you're just rooting for him, like, oh, they're going to teach him how. That's what I would have taken away from that.
Yeah, well, and of course the thing, and I write about this in this chapter, is it somehow bonded me with OJ, and I don't know why, but he wanted to be my friend. He did want to be my buddy Mike. He really didn't talk to Mike. He didn't talk to the choreographer. It was, the one he was really talking to was me. And somehow he and I developed this very quick friendship. And then things on the set started to get very strange, because one of the two women was this beautiful blonde, and he started hitting on the blonde woman and started saying a lot of incredibly inappropriate and offensive things. And then it put me in this very difficult ethical dilemma, because now here OJ is theoretically my friend. OJ is very powerful. He's telling me he's got this new series on NBC coming out about SEALs. And that he plays, wait for it, a knife expert in this new series, which is they just shot the pilot for. So think about that for a second.
Irony is alive and well in our world. It really is.
I mean, you just can't make this stuff up. And apparently they gave him some knife training to play the part, and it's just incredible, this coincidence. And I'm thinking to myself, wow, OJ can get me on this show. He's going to be the lead, and he likes me, and this will be good for my acting career. And yet at the same time, I'm watching him treat this woman in a way which is completely wrong, and forget about unprofessional. It's offensive. And so I pull her aside and I say, "Look, I'm a member of the Screen Actors Guild. We can call the Screen Actors Guild. We can get a monitor down here. They'll force him to stop." And of course, she doesn't want to make waves. She doesn't want her career to be impacted negatively. And of course, if I had called the Screen Actors Guild, probably they would have found out that I was the one that called. Probably I would have been fired. And she just decided to grin and bear it. But it was really, it was just terrible. It was just terrible. And I hope and pray it would not happen today. I don't think it would. But at the time in the 90s, he was a star, and people just kind of was just grin and bear it. What was, again, another ironic thing was that I didn't know who Nicole Brown Simpson was, but a week later or 10 days later, whenever it was, and I'm watching, OJ drive the white Bronco down the 405 as he's trying to, I guess, escape to Mexico. They're, of course, showing pictures of Nicole Brown Simpson on TV. She's been murdered. And what was striking and both staggering was how much the woman in the exercise video, this beautiful young blonde woman, resembled Nicole Brown Simpson. And that was something that I never forgot was, OJ clearly had a type. And again, it was just an incredible coincidence, I guess, that the woman in the video look like his ex-wife.
Stories we don't typically hear about him, I don't think. And I remember when all this happened, and I was so appalled by all of it. Just how awful the murders were. It was just, well, let's just not go down that road. But thank you for sharing that. I think it tells a lot about who and what he really was. Not a nice guy.
No, and incredibly gregarious, but he was one of those people you were his best friend or his worst enemy. You could just see, and people said to me, well, at the time, did you think he was, capable of committing a double murder? And of course the answer is no. But in retrospect, you look back and you go, wow, all the signs were there. Like, for him to treat that woman the way he did with such utter disdain and disrespect in front of the whole crew, you realize, okay, if his ex-wife wasn't doing what he wanted her to do, or if he thought she was dating someone else or whatever it is, you could just see how it could turn. And in terms of, his size and strength, I remember, I'm 6'1". At the time I was probably 185 pounds. I was in the best shape of my life. And when I shook his hand, I felt like a twig standing next to an oak.
I have to ask, did anybody else on that set go to that girl and try to help her or comfort her?
Not to my knowledge, no.
That's bad. That's very, very bad. Okay, let's move away from OJ because I'm getting a knot in my stomach, to be honest. Okay, I've got the book in front of me and I'm looking for this. Okay, so let me find the hang on just a second. I'm still just kind of shook up by OJ Simpson. Frank Abagnale, catch me if you can. He praised your social engineering skills on the cover of Ruse. How did you connect with him and what's your take on his compliment?
Oh, it was really just a beautiful thing, when you write a book, your agent and publisher go out to people that have written similar books, and they ask for a testimonial, an endorsement, they call it a blurb, and somebody had the idea, I can't remember who it was, of approaching Frank Abagnale, and in my head I said, well, there's no way that Frank Abagnale is going to respond to that email, let alone take the time to read my book. And much to my amazement, he did respond, and he said, "Yes, I would love to read it. I'm actually interested in corporate spying." And he read it, and he loved it, and he gave us this amazing blurb, which obviously is on the cover of the book, and it was just really very kind of him, and I think spoke a little bit to the fact that apparently, my book is the only book that has ever been written about the world of corporate spying. I can't. I'm not saying that. I think my publisher said that. And what I'm most proud of with the book is, the book is not it's not a textbook on corporate spying or something like that. It's written like it reads like a spy novel. It reads like it's fiction. But I'm here to tell you everything in the book is true. Everything in the book happened. Corporate spying is alive and well, and corporations spend hundreds of millions of dollars a year to spy on each other, and they're willing to do anything and everything that they can to find out anything and everything that they can about their top rivals. Again, corporate spying is just as cutthroat as the NFL.
And I read the book as a memoir. I didn't read it as a novel. I read it as this is what happened in your life, which again I find so fascinating. But I wanted to ask you, Robert, what motivated you to write Ruse and share your experiences? Because, as you just shared, you're probably the first or only one that's actually done that to date.
Well, so I had like the proverbial midlife crisis. Before I was an actor, I actually was an English major in college, and I just couldn't sit still to really do any significant writing, and became an actor. And then later in life, had after spying, had this midlife crisis, which is all in the book in Ruse, and I started writing again, and I was writing, and to my surprise, I started writing short stories. They started getting accepted in magazines. I started writing articles. They started getting accepted in newspapers. And when the Woolsey fire happened in 2018, and I wrote that essay for the LA Times, and that turned into the book Malibu Burning, all of a sudden, I had a published book, and I started getting invited to writers' conferences, and I'd had something on the corporate spying, but I didn't really think much about it. And at one point, I read the opening of Ruse at a writers' conference, and people went, crazy. They just said, "Oh my God, like, we didn't know corporate spies existed. We didn't know you had been a corporate spy. You have to write a book about this." And that was when I began to realize, I mean, I kind of always knew it was interesting. But of course, I was a little bit afraid to tell these stories, for legal reasons to start off with. One of the things I did was I had to wait for the statute of limitations to expire, for any, potential crimes that I may or may not have committed, which was 10 years. And so by the time I actually started writing it, I was somewhere around 7 or 8 years. So I knew, wow, by the time I finish writing it and this book gets published, it's going to be 10 years. It's going to be fine. But yeah, so I think that was the thing, is I kind of didn't know how much people were going to respond to corporate spying. And when they did, it just made me realize, okay, I've got to write a book on this.
And Robert, during your time as a corporate spy, and when I first, spoke with you, you said you're a spy, and I went, "What kind of spy?" I mean, my eyebrows went up. I went, "What? What are you talking about?" And then, of course, the book came to me and went, "Okay, now I get it." But did you ever face legal consequences for your activities during that time, or did you manage to be safe?
Well, I don't want to spoil it for the readers. Let me just say it was touch and go. It was touch and go, and I was pursued by a lot of agencies with three letters in their names.
I think that was my real question. I didn't want to kind of put it out there. And the reason I'm asking it, well, a couple of reasons, but Valerie Plame, who is a former CIA officer, she praised your storytelling in the book. Did she happen to share any insights about female spies compared to their male counterparts?
Well, that's funny because when the woman who hired me, so this firm, Leona, the woman who hired me, obviously Leona was a woman, so she was, running, a female running this corporate spying firm, and she only hired women. She just believed that women made the best spies. They were the only ones that could do the spying. And my buddy was the first man she'd ever hired, and I was the second man she ever hired. And then she never ever hired any men again. It was only women. And at one point, I was doing an event with Valerie. Valerie's been a big supporter of the book and really a kind, just an incredibly kind person, very smart person, and a talented writer as well. And I said that to her. I said, "Well, the Leona said that only women made the best spies," and Valerie said, "Of course, women make the best spies." And I thought that was very funny because Valerie has her own fascinating history as a spy.
And now I have to ask you, did you ever or do you ever find yourself using your rusing skills in your personal life? And if you tell me no, I'm not going to believe you. So careful how you answer that one.
You caught me on that one. I was going to say no. Um, I think the challenge is when you're doing corporate spying, you are lying, right? You are lying. You are making up stories, making up information, making up voices, making up characters, doing accents, doing anything and everything you can to get information you're not supposed to have. And we talked about org charts, but it was oftentimes much more than that. Corporate secrets, product information, pricing information, contract information, salary information, right? Anything and everything that you can sell to that company's rivals, and you can sell it for big money. And I'm here to tell you, earlier in our chat, I mentioned I was making $8 an hour. And at the height of my career, I went from $8 an hour to $2 million a year. So that shows you how valuable the information was. And so I really tried to, as best I could, not use my rusing skills, my social engineering skills in everyday life, because I didn't like to think of myself, as a liar. I was like, okay, well, this is something that I do for my job. It's part of the capitalist system. And again, this is me rationalizing what I did, not justifying, but that's how I rationalized it. Well, this is capitalism. I'm not the only corporate spy out there, though I'm here to tell you there are only a handful. But if I'm not doing it, they're going to hire somebody else to do it, blah, 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 right? But I really did not want to take that into my personal life. Because it's a pretty powerful thing to have, that you have the ability to, misrepresent who you are to find out things that you should know now about, I don't know, your neighbors or your friend or your, person you're dating, or, whatever thing you could do to to use it for, right? So I feel pretty good that I didn't do that. But I'm sure somewhere along the line that I did something to kind of find out something in my personal life, and use those skills a little bit here and there.
And that does make sense. I mean, I think it would be difficult not to know more about somebody that's important to you if you've got some questions. And I was going to ask you, Robert, how did you reconcile the ethical implications of your work? But you already touched on that. And thank you for getting ahead of me. I really appreciate that. So, based on your experience, what do you consider the most significant vulnerability in what's going on now in modern cybersecurity, maybe?
I love that question. And I love that question because, we live in a technical world, right? We live in a world where, we think that the human element is sort of, we get these phishing texts and phishing emails, and people are trying to hack us, people are trying to hack corporations, and you know the the social engineers are having sort of a moment, a resurrection, if you will, because one of the things we've learned is that the weakest link in cybersecurity is always the human being. And you can have the best, firewall, encryption, network, server, all of the technical things. But if I can pick up my phone and I can use my call spoofing and I can do an accent and I can do all of these, rusing techniques, which I talk about in the book, and I can get you to, because you're in customer service for a big company, or you're a junior person who's only 3 months with a new company or whatever, if I can take advantage of that and get you to tell me things that you should not tell me, or get me to reset a password that you should not reset, or any of these things that I could do and that social engineers can do, it doesn't just put a company, at in terms of, okay, I got this secret, or I got, it can literally shut a corporation down. I mean, shut a corporation down. I exaggerate not. Not long ago, just over a year ago, one of the largest casinos in Las Vegas was hacked. They were a victim of a ransomware attack. They were shut down. The casino did not operate. The elevators in the hotel did not operate. People couldn't get in their door to their room because the keys would not operate. And all of that started with a social engineering phone call. And that's the thing that corporations, many of them, they spend millions and millions and millions of dollars protecting the technology, and they spend almost no money training their employees about these kinds of very sophisticated social engineering hacks, which are designed to get information to enable the technical hacking. Does that make sense?
And I'm glad you brought that up about the casino. And at local levels, we know about things. It's not hacking, but I live, I'm literally equidistant between hurricanes Katrina and Rita. We have storms, so we have a lot going on down here in the Deep South. And it's not unusual to be in the middle of a grocery store trying to denude the shelves of milk, butter, and beer, whatever you think you're going to need to survive. And all of a sudden the power goes off and you can't swipe your card. You can't get out the doors. Nothing works. And which is on a much, much bigger and dastardly level. So I understand it.
Yeah, and of course, that's one of the big things that's scary about future warfare. And we're not going to go down this road very long, but that what will work and what won't work, and what may be the case is that nothing works, and that is very scary. That is frightening.
To go back, I'd made a note about when we were talking just a few minutes ago about CIA Valerie Plame, and she is former CIA Valerie Plame, and she's quoted in your book. I'm looking at it saying, "I loved Ruse. What a crazy story!" And believe me, I know crazy. Successful spies are great storytellers, and Robert Kerbeck ranks up there with the best of them. That's nice. That's very, very nice.
Yeah, I have really been lucky to get Frank Abagnale and Valerie Plame to say nice things about my book. Arguably, he wrote the best book, of course, which was made into an incredible movie with Tom Hanks and Leonardo DiCaprio, one of my favorite movies. And then her book was also made into a movie with Sean Penn and Naomi Watts, Fair Game. So to get two people like that wrote such wonderful books, and then of course those books were made into great movies. I never ever expected that Ruse would get people like that, coming on board.
When is yours going to be made into a movie?
Great question. Well, it's been optioned two times.
Oh, good.
Yeah, it's out there fighting. Unfortunately, in Hollywood, things take time. I mean, sometimes obviously things get made right away, and then other times you hear the story of a movie takes 2 years, 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, 20 years. I run a literary salon in Malibu where I live, and I interviewed this really incredible author, Percival Everett. And he wrote the book that the movie American Fiction was based on. And American Fiction came out last year, and it was nominated for all these Oscars. I think it won the Oscar for Best Adapted Screenplay. Had all these great actors in it, and the book that Percival wrote that American Fiction was based on was called Erasure, and that book was written, I believe, in 2002. So for him, it took 20 years for that book to get made into a movie. And we were talking about that, and I was like, well, okay, Ruse is only 2 years. I guess I got some time still.
Wrong button. Are you familiar with a man named Ken Atchity?
No.
I'm going to introduce you. He is the Story Merchant Companies, and you've heard the Meg movie or heard of the Meg movies. He's responsible for those. So if you want, I'll be happy to introduce you.
Oh, well, that would be very kind of you.
Oh, he's one of my favorite people in the world. He knows that I tell him all the time, but I just made a note to make that introduction. You never know. Maybe he knows something he can help you. You just don't know. But I wanted to, when you started this book, at any point did you say, I don't know about this. I think I might be, sticking my head in a noose. But you did say that you had let the 10 years go.
Yeah, I worried about that. I mean, the big change that the publisher made was that we changed the names of the companies. So we, created fictional company names. Like, one of the banks is, Stadt Bank, and the reason for that is while everything in the book is true, everything in the book happened, at the end of the day, major corporations have armies of attorneys on staff, and we were concerned they would sue us into oblivion, just because they've got the money and the attorneys that I certainly don't have, and that the publisher doesn't really have, and we really didn't want to get involved with fighting a zillion lawsuits, so we simply changed the names of the companies. But everything that happened with those companies and executives with those companies is 110% the truth.
It was at reading it, I went, I think I know who this company is, but
Yeah.
it's very cleverly disguised, but I think I know who that was. In your experience, Robert, do companies ever openly acknowledge that they're hiring corporate spies, or is that just kind of a well-known secret?
Yeah, it's a quite a well-known secret, and what they do to give themselves plausible deniability, so that if, for example, I had ever been caught, they hire spies through third parties. So they'll hire, I was hired through executive recruiting firms, executive search firms, consulting firms are big ones for hiring spies, and they have that as a way of saying, well, boy, we had no idea what Robert was doing. We didn't even hire Robert. We hired this consulting company. And that's what they do to give themselves an out if the what hits the fan.
I wanted to ask you, it's kind of a roundabout question, but is corporate espionage still prevalent today? And I think you've already answered that. But how has it evolved since your time in the field? And let's talk a bit about AI.
Well, I think what's going on now that is really frightening with spying is the spies are sort of colluding with hackers, or spies are working with hackers, or the hackers are also spies, and they're using the spying techniques that I talk about in Ruse. They're using those spying techniques for ransomware attacks. And that is the whole kind of new world that has, really exploded in the last couple of years. Because if I could call your company and I could, basically learn how your system is set up via social engineering, and I could learn, the easy way to hack the system, the easy way into the system by getting people in the company to explain it to me and tell it to me, well, then I can share that information with my hacking colleague, my hacking team, and now all of a sudden we're able to do whatever we want to do, shut your company down, blackmail your company. You got to send us, $1 million in Bitcoin or $10 million in Bitcoin or whatever it is. Otherwise, we're going to shut your company down. And so that's where corporate spying is actually, I think, even become more dangerous. And that's why corporations, it's just incumbent on them to train their people, because if they don't spend a lot of time on training and educating, especially young employees, new employees, who are very vulnerable to spies, they're asking for a corporate disaster.
I had actually underscored what I wrote down about training people because you had mentioned that earlier and I was going to come back to it, but you just did. So thank you. I wanted to ask you, this is where we start to have a little bit of fun. Can you describe, well, it's been fun all along, but can you describe some of the clever ruses that you employed to no, not that one. I'm sorry. I got away from myself. I wanted you to tell me if you would, let me find my notes. Sorry about that. And it was an important question too. Trust me, it really was. I wanted you to describe some of the clever ruses you have employed. Just some of the more fun ones, some of the ones that you've might have thought, oh, that shouldn't have worked, but it did.
Uh,
Tell us some
well,
stories.
each one of we were called researchers, but we were really spies. And each one of the spies that Leona hired had kind of their go-to ploy, their go-to, character. So for me, it was this one. This is Gerhard calling from the office in Frankfurt, Germany. We have the European Union regulators here and we need some information from the States. And
Keep
anytime I would
going.
my crazy German accent, my crazy German character, people would laugh. People would laugh. I could hear them smiling on the other end of the phone line. And that's what you want, because now I have thrown them off. I've taken them off guard. I've got them smiling. I've got them laughing. They're working hard. They're stressed out. They're on this deadline. Their boss is yelling and all of a sudden now they're laughing because they got this kooky German guy with this funny accent on the phone. So are they going to help Gerhard? Of course they are, right? Because I've just brightened up their day in some strange sort of way. And so Gerhard, the first time because we would all do accents, we would all do different accents, and everybody had their go-to. This one woman, it was Irish. My friend that got me the job, he would do a British accent. And I could do those too, but for me, I found that the German one was the money one, and so I stuck with it. And people, it was always shocking to me that not only would people tell Gerhardt whatever Gerhardt wanted to know, if they didn't know, they'd say, "Hey, Gerhardt, you know what? I don't know the answer to that. You know what? Hold on. Can you hold on a minute?" "Oh, yeah, yeah." "Okay, hold on 1 minute. I'm going to call over to somebody else in a different department, in a different area, because I think they may know the answer to that question. I'll be right back." And so now somebody who's internal in the company is acting as an internal mole for me, getting the information that I want because they don't know it. They're now on a mission to find it for me. And that was something that I always found incredible, was that I would turn people into unwitting spies for me.
Loads of breadcrumbs for you to follow.
Oh yeah, I mean, and the information people would get, because now, like when I would call people, I would have to sort of prove that I was a legitimate person, prove I was someone that worked for the firm. But once I got somebody who's inside the firm calling someone else inside the firm, 99% of the time, whoever they were calling for this other information, these people knew each other. They had met, they'd had lunch, they'd had drinks. So when this person calls and says, "Hey, I'm trying to find out how do we reset the password on the blah, 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 blah," and the other person go, "Oh, well, yeah, the way you do," they're not even questioning the legitimacy of the request. They're just going, "Oh yeah, the way you reset it, here's how you do it, da da da, you got to make sure this, you got to make sure they do that, blah, blah, blah. Okay, great, thanks so much." And now somebody has explained to me how to easily get into their system.
Back to training. I have noticed, and I'm not a big movie watcher, and I admit this all the time. You hand me a book, I'm all happy. You want me to watch a YouTube video? Probably not going to. And movies, unless they're spectacular and grab my attention. Top Gun Maverick, I'll watch that all day long. I turn it on for the background noise. But I'm just not and never have been a movie watcher. But when I do watch movies, and I notice this every Christmas because all of a sudden, I'm watching Christmas movies, it's mandatory. And I'll realize that the really cruddy actors don't know a darn thing about psychology. They have no idea how to present or show up. And I wish they'd take those false eyelashes off, but that's a whole different topic. But to me, a great actor is somebody who knows his persona inside and out and lives it. Am I wrong?
No, I mean, that's one of the things I always felt like when I was, in the zone as a spy, I could hear your thoughts on the other end of the phone line. I knew what you were thinking. I knew what you were going to say. I knew if you were going to help me. I knew if you were going to object to helping me. And so I would be anticipating your response so that I had a response ready to basically counter your, let's say you weren't going to go with me. You were suspicious. You weren't believing me. I had a story already prepared so that all of a sudden you were like, oh, that's exactly what I was thinking. That was exactly what my problem was. Oh, you just addressed it. You just satisfied my objection. Got it. No problem. Let me help you now.
And I find, and I don't know if this is part of your acting chops or if it's just, who you are deep down, but you do listen and you're paying an awful lot of attention. So how do you describe yourself?
I think, I always, somebody said this to me a long time ago and it stuck with me. We have two ears and one mouth, so we should listen twice as much as we talk. So I'm not doing that in this interview, but in life in general, I do try to be aware of that and be cognizant of that. And so, as a spy, one of the things you learn is people want to talk. People want to tell you things. People want to tell you secrets. People want to tell you problems at a corporation. People want to tell you issues at a corporation, which again are all part of the corporate spying playbook. I want to be able to go back to my client and tell them that they're having a problem meeting a certain deadline, they're having a problem with a certain supply chain issue. All of these things are incredibly valuable for my client. And so the way you get that information is you get people talking and you shut up.
Out of the way. I say this all the time on this podcast. My job is to let you shine and I shut up. I get it. Well, we are out of time, Robert. I can't believe this hour went so quickly. And thank you for joining us today. It's been a genuine pleasure chatting with you, and I love your book. Before I let you go, very reluctantly, do you have any final thoughts to share? And where can our audience connect with you and find both of your books?
Oh, well, thank you for having me. Yeah, I just tell people my website is probably the best place. It's simple. It's, just www.robertkerbeck.com. And I also tell listeners that I respond to anybody that reaches out. You can email me from my website. You can find me on Instagram or LinkedIn. You can message me. If anybody's looking to pivot to a lucrative new career as a corporate spy, you can reach out. I'm happy to give you some tips.
I may have to find a new career here pretty soon. People do tell me things that they'll call me later and go, I didn't mean to say that. It's okay. If I thought it was any problem, I would have cut it off. Listen, today, to our audience, in today's episode of Your Partner in Success Radio, my fascinating guest, Robert Kerbeck, pulled back the curtain on corporate espionage. He's calling it spying, but yeah, I'm happier with corporate espionage. It just doesn't sound so stark. And he shared his incredible journey from struggling actor to master ruser who extracted high stakes corporate secrets. And through candid storytelling telling and insider insights, he revealed the techniques, the ethical challenges, and personal transformations behind his memoir, Ruse. Do you want the full story? Grab a copy of Ruse, Lying, Lying, The American Dream from Hollywood to Wall Street, and follow his extraordinary adventures in corporate intelligence. And go look for the Malibu book. And that is very, very timely. It's an older book, but boy, do we need to know more about that. So thank you. And I will see you next week. Robert, thank you again. I thoroughly enjoyed your company.
Oh, thank you, Denise.
Get your voice heard. If you would like to launch your own far-reaching podcast, contact Denise Griffitts at yourofficeontheweb.com and go to the podcast tab.